Greetings, distinguished followers. I hope you are all doing well. It's been a minute. I apologise. Welcome back to my series of videos where I talk about classic Doctor Who stories which kind of fall into the spooky/gothic parameter. I thought it was the right time of year to talk about such things. So here we go. I put it to you, the audience, to nominate which were the best ones to talk about in this series of videos, and you came up with some absolute belters. There were some fairly obvious ones and some also slightly off-piste ones as well. And it's some of the off-piste ones which interested me the most. I mean, when you think about spooky and gothic in classic Doctor Who, you immediately jump to the Philip Hinchcliffe era. And despite the fact that those gothic nuances seen in the Philip Hinchcliffe era would be replicated in later stories, such as Ghostlight, which I covered last time around, it's kind of hard to imagine anything of that ilk coming before, save for some obvious examples such as the demons in the Pertwee era. The black and white era is pretty much a write-off for stories that have that kind of spooky gothic element, or is it? There was one suggestion that was made to me a couple of times which I've talked about on this channel before, but I never once considered it gothic, and that was The Rescue, a William Hartnell story. And when I typed in gothic Doctor Who stories into Google, one of the first entries was a list from Wiki Fandom, and The Rescue was right at the top. And I suppose looking a bit deeper, you can kind of consider this gothic. I mean, it's got the Jekyll and Hyde dual personality of Quillian/Bennett, and you also have the despairing tribulations of brand new female protagonist Vicky. And that entire end scene when they're in the temple and you have those two bizarre ghost-like figures turning up, the whole thing resonates gothic vibes, even though I didn't really think about it at the time, but looking back, yeah, it kind of does fit the bill. However, that is not the story I'm going to talk about this time around. The story I'm going to talk about this time around is of a great deal more interest to me for a number of reasons that I will go into. It is a story that features foam, underwater plants, and also a story that is lost to the great archive in the sky. I am talking about 1968's Fury from the Deep. It's kind of easy to miss Fury from the Deep, what with it not actually existing. Other ways that you can enjoy this story include listening to the audio, feasting your eyes on the numerous telesnaps, or watching the recent animated adaptation, which I will be going into more detail on that as we go on. This story was originally embedded in Season 5 of classic Doctor Who and was the last adventure featuring companion Victoria. It also had a kind of real-world reflection going on with current affairs and events in the story. Ooh, leave politics out of Doctor Who. Brr. The year, 1975. The location, some rugged beach cliffs somewhere in England. I like that ambiguity. The TARDIS lands smack bang on top of the sea, and if you want to see a video version of that, then they actually reuse the clip in the War Games. Yeah, it's pretty cool. A small miniature TARDIS dangled off a helicopter, apparently. I like the effect. So, rather than rematerialise the TARDIS somewhere closer to the location, which I suppose the Doctor did have trouble doing at the time with his TARDIS, and it would just be the easy option and therefore boring, they get on a boat and row to the beach. And it's at this point, after a bit of exploring, that they find a gas pipe, and surrounding the gas pipe is... Okay, right, for any children watching this, okay, if you're somewhere, anywhere, and there's a big metal pipe and you find some weird foam around the pipe, don't have a snowball fight with it. You don't know what it smacks a load into Victoria's face. You're supposed to be looking after these people. Come on, Doctor. So this pipeline was manufactured by the good people at ESGO, a Euro gas refinery providing gas for the south of England and Wales. Ergo the concept of the story, which was written by Victor Pemberton, who was fascinated by the real-life refineries that were being created at the time of this story. And straight off the bat we get our first gothic nuance of this story. There is a recurring sound that you will hear throughout this entire serial, and that is a strange heartbeat, which forewarns the arrival of this malicious seaweed that we will see more of later in the adventure. But for the moment, moment, it's a kind of ambiguous sound, the source of which nobody knows. And this in itself was inspired originally by the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Telltale Heart, where a murderer-type fellow hears a mysterious heartbeat under the floorboards, and it's at this point that the Doctor unveils a brand new gizmo, never before seen. This isn't just any screwdriver he's holding here, it's a sonic screwdriver. He waves it over a panel attached to the gas refinery, and the screws spin off of their own accord. Wow. I hope that comes in handy somewhere later down the line. They all get shot with tranquilizers. They wake up in the main interior of the refinery, and it is at this point that they first meet Robson. Robson is the boss here, and he is a real piece of work. Relentlessly shouty, cranky, argumentative, and completely dismissive of the obvious explanation that there is some kind of tentacle-based creature at work here. Even though it's obvious to us Doctor Who fans and several other characters in this story, he's having none of it. I mean, it is a credible bit of casting. The whole appearance and characterization of this guy really fits the bill, I think. Like, you can almost imagine that if there was somebody in charge of a sea-based refinery, which must be a very cold and endless and thankful job, it would be this type of person. Very egotistical, very hard-nosed and difficult to negotiate with, but here he is. In the Target novelization, it's also explained that several years ago his wife died in a car crash, hence the extra chip on the shoulder that this guy has. By the time the Doctor and his companions are on the scene, Robson's crankiness has been turned up to 11, not just due to the appearance of these supposed saboteurs, but also because of various problems that the rig is currently having. The pressure in the gas lines are continuously dropping, and even worse, they have lost contact with all the surrounding rigs in the sea area, with the exception of one where the person in charge is slightly subdued, and when he says everything's okay, doesn't really seem like his heart's in it. Naturally, this whole affair has piqued the Doctor's interest, but first they have to do the thing of escaping from the room in which they've been imprisoned. This is long before psychic paper, so they gotta do it the hard way. And at the end of the first episode, you get the first appearance of the seaweed and the accompanying foam. And this is where the entire feel of the story really kicks in. When I was putting in a bit of research for this video, I read an article in a 1999 edition of Doctor Who magazine, and even here I think there was one element to this story that hasn't really been covered in any great detail, which as far as I'm concerned is a crime. The music score, a Dudley Simpson composition, really puts the meat on the bones of this story. It's just brilliant. Like, there are so many compositions of this era that I think are ahead of its time, even in the Hartnell era as well. I think any music score that harnessed the power of electronic music before the age of the synth keyboard should be recognised as a stellar achievement, and in this instance you've got an absolute banger. It is so creepy, it's unreal, and when you get to the end of the first episode / the beginning of the second episode, the first time this music score really comes into play really brings a new dimension to the horror and gothicness of this story. There are other melodies of the same ilk peppered throughout this entire serial, and the only time I think it feels dated is there's a slightly comedic jingle that they do sometimes when the characters Oak and Quill appear. I think that one sounds a bit silly, but the rest are top notch, and I think it's a bit of a shame that this is one of the music tracks that isn't celebrated as much as any other nuances of this story. So the Doctor finds common ground with a character called Van Leutens, and they can share their observations together to get to the bottom of exactly what's happening here. By this point, it's fairly obvious that there is some kind of underground entity that is coming up, and it has certain weaknesses and certain strengths, the nature of which they have yet to get to the bottom of. Anyway, here's a character who is crucial to the identity of this story, and that is Maggie. She is married to Mr. Harris, who is one of the operatives aboard the refinery, and they live in one of the accommodation buildings purposely built near the refinery, and the interior of this building, I don't know why. I'm bloody obsessed with it. I don't know why. So this story has a very industrial vibe to it. There's a very industrious look to a lot of the scenery here, and that much is clear just from looking at the telesnaps. And the fact you've got this supposedly homely interior existing on the periphery of that, in and of itself, I find quite interesting. But the entire cosmetics of this house, I just find really strange. It's so compact and so claustrophobic, and it makes this desperate attempt to draw on some kind of kitsch, retro aesthetic looking vibe to make it seem more like a comfortable interior. This kitchen, it's like they've got wallpaper designs on the cupboards. I don't really get it. I wasn't alive in the 60s, so how would I know? But every shot of this interior I just find strangely creepy, like something that's desperately trying to be homely, but just missing the mark entirely, and therefore is instead being very just unpleasant and unsettling. And this is where I've got to talk about the animation. The animated adaptation, I think, is very good indeed, but I also think, unfortunately, that is kind of to the detriment of the original product. I don't think it's untoward that animated adaptations add some extra exterior establishing shots of certain locations. Like in this example, you've got a great exterior setting of the refinery itself, which obviously didn't exist in the original. And it is beautiful, the fact you've got this industrial complex on the rugged coast. Cool. But I think it goes to town a little too much in other aspects and replaces the original aesthetics with a bit too much artistic license of its own. Like, even the pipes look so much better than the original. And the same with the house itself. The house just looks completely different to how it looked originally, and there are some added exteriors of the weed bouncing around and trying to dig its way through the cracks, and it looks great. But I don't think the original product looked anything like this, whereas in some other animations, such as the faceless ones, the homages are done with just that little bit more faithfulness. I mean, you decide whether or not this is a good thing. It is purely subjective, of course, but for me, it's just, I don't know, it's too good. And speaking of creepy goings-on in the house, this is where you get introduced to Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill, who, for all intents and purposes, were meant to be like a kind of evil Laurel and Hardy-esque duo. The smaller of the two does all the talking and insists on making a false inspection of the house against Maggie's will, and the other taller guy stands in the background looking creepy. But the real culmination of their creepiness is when they stand there with their mouths open, breathing out gas which helps the weed entity to propagate. Anyone who has expressed any kind of interest in this serial will have seen this image somewhere down the line, and it is probably the most striking visual of the entire serial. So we learn the true nature of this seaweed and how it is able to propagate above the surface. You see, the seaweed is capable of contaminating a human host and controlling that human host's wishes and desires in order to cultivate its own presence all across the world eventually, supposedly. It has contaminated Oak and Quill, and then it contaminates Maggie, and then it eventually contaminates Robson himself, which is when the poop really hits the fan. In the run-up to this, you get an extremely cool scene in the TARDIS where the Doctor is studying a piece of the seaweed in a glass case. It is here that the Doctor refers to a book of ancient legends and superstitions, and there's an entire passage about mariners in the 18th century talking of a mysterious creature. There's a drawing. It is exactly like the seaweed that they are encountering at the moment, meaning this seaweed has existed on this planet for centuries. It is not an alien. Much like the Silurians, this is a homegrown, Earth-based creature, and because of the recent gas-piped refinery digging into the ocean, this creature is now able to find a new way up to the surface and carry out a malevolent plan to take over the entire world of its own volition. Episode 3 ends in a gloriously surreal scene. Robson and Maggie, both of whom have been infected by the seaweed, have a conversation on the coastline before Maggie walks slowly into the sea until she disappears underwater.
There is little time. You know what you must do.
Yes.
You will obey.
Again, the animation pulls out all the stops in making this visually impressive. However, I am gutted the original doesn't exist, because this screenshot alone I just think is beautiful. I love the fact that Robson is completely silhouetted and the shot composition is perfect. Just the fact that Maggie is said to have eventually completely and utterly disappeared under the water would have been brilliant to see. Such a shame it doesn't exist anymore. In an attempt to figure out ways to neutralise this threat, the Doctor and some of the other crew members journey down the main pipeline, and it is here that they have more encounters with the weed and the foam accompanying the weed. The Doctor Who production team were obsessed with foam at this point. They had a big foam machine and they'd use any excuse to utilise it in the stories, and that is why everything is foamy or the... It was also a fairly nifty way of shrouding the main appearance of this creature. I mean, all you see are tentacles. The animation takes a few liberties with that thing, but in the original story it was mainly just tentacles, which left a little bit to the imagination and was kind of a cool way of filling in the gaps. Probably better than if they created some kind of hulking great big weed creature, perhaps. With their efforts seemingly fruitless, the Doctor and co can only stand there as the seaweed proceeds to take over the entire base, at which point the Doctor says this.
It's begun. The Battle of the Giants.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So the Doctor realises that a good idea would probably be to go to the main rig of all the rigs that are out in the sea, where the seaweed infection is probably the most concentrated. And this leads to a helicopter scene, an exciting bit of adventure where the helicopter flies around the rig and the foam and the tentacles are trying to attack it, and there is a kind of mixture of real-life piloting of helicopters and model utilisation, none of which we actually see at all. There's a few screenshots, the animation does it justice, but it is generally lost. Victoria is kidnapped by Robson, and Robson is basically asking for help taking over the world. I mean, you don't ask, you don't get, I suppose. But a strange thing happens. When they have another heated encounter with the seaweed, Victoria screams and that repels the seaweed. When the Doctor rescues her and flies back to the main refinery, he discovers that sound is one of the best ways to repel this entity, and with the help of Megan, director of the board, he is able to fashion a gizmo. By the way, Victoria is sick and tired of this point. For the last couple of episodes, she is constantly talking about how she is tired of the adventures, she doesn't have fun anymore, and it's basically just a bit of a stress for her. Her heart's not in it. So Victoria's scream is recorded and captured in this device that the Doctor has built, and then the scream is transmitted outward via these strange little white giant earbud looking devices that can be wielded by anyone face to face with the seaweed. The adventure kind of culminates in this scene, a video footage of which does sort of exist, of when the seaweed breaches the main headquarters and they are all using these sonic things to repel it. I mean, I suppose Victoria does sort of go out in style. It is her scream that saves the day. The weed is repelled and that pretty much neutralises the effect. Guess what, everybody? Everyone lives, pretty much. Resurrection of the Daleks, this is not. Now, it might seem like I've oversimplified the conclusion to this story just a little bit, but that is because I want to spend a bit more time talking about what could have been. You see, this is one of those stories, like so many others in the classic era, when the original premise was very different to what we had in the end. Fury from the Deep was subject to numerous rewrites, so much to the point that its original writer, Victor Pemberton, almost didn't want his name put to the end product. For one thing, this particular Doctor Who story was originally titled Colony of Devils, but the word devil was deemed inappropriate for a family audience, which was a policy clearly not taken forward into the Pertwee era, because we had a story titled The Sea Devils and another story called The Demons. But this wasn't the only change that was made from Fury from the Deep. The original blueprint for this story told of something that was a little bit darker and involved a little bit more depth. This is something that I discovered in greater detail when I was reading that original Doctor Who magazine write-up. Some of those differences were made clear in passages such as this. There was an entirely different subplot bridging episodes 4 and 5. During episode 4, it is stated that the seaweed creature can pump its lethal gas through the pipelines to anywhere in the country. An important conference is taking place near the refinery, and the cliffhanger was to be a race against time for the Doctor and his companions to turn off the refinery supply and thus prevent the VIPs at the conference room from being gassed. At the start of episode 5, the Doctor, Jamie and Victoria arrive to discover that they are too late. The only person left alive is Swan, now almost a complete seaweed creature. Jamie attacks Swan and Victoria's screams kill the infected man. All rigs bar the control rig are now covered by the weed. And Victoria's screams being used as a weapon is cool, don't get me wrong, but there is another element that they completely cut out of this story that I think would have been brilliant, and that is the fact that Jamie's bagpipes are also used as an audio weapon against these creatures. Jamie blowing his bagpipes to destroy underwater sentient seaweed, and we didn't get that. We just can't have good things. In this write-up from the 99 Doctor Who magazine, you also get a little passage talking about the slide, which was the original blueprint of this story that never actually made it to Doctor Who, so it was repurposed as a BBC radio serial of its own volition and also starred Mr. Roger Delgado. What we did get was this: a dinner. Back at that same house, no less. And the Doctor and Robson, despite everything, are getting on swimmingly.
I think I wanted to keep you locked up, Doctor.
Well, lots of people have tried.
Didn't want to.
It's just weird. It's like a post-production after party when all the actors are kicking back because the show's been wrapped up and now they've just let their hair down and become their true selves. It doesn't really fit anywhere else in the story, but look how creepy it is in the animation. But I suppose it's only as bizarre as everything else that goes on in this story. I can't help thinking this scene would have been better if you had one of those creepy Dudley Simpson soundtracks going over it.
I think I wanted to keep you locked up, Doctor.
Well, lots of people have tried.
Didn't want to.
And before we say goodbye to Victoria, it cuts back to the refinery and Robson's just being a dick to everyone again. He didn't learn. So it's a goodbye from Victoria in a somewhat poignant end scene. Obviously, she doesn't want to go back to her own time with the thing with the Daleks. Instead, she is adopted by Maggie and Mr. Harris, where she will live in the creepy house. And they say goodbye on the beach, and Jamie's a bit frustrated, and the Doctor says, I miss her too. And that is where they fly off to the wheel. So ends the Fury from the Deep. Fury from the Deep is a winner as far as I'm concerned. I think the few final episodes probably could have been condensed a little bit. I think this would have worked a little bit better as a 4-part serial, but there you go. I mean, this no longer exists, which is a shame because some of the visuals we missed out on by the telesnaps alone I know would have been great to see. So maybe one day this will, resurface, and when it does, we can truly get a handle on how well these ideas worked and if the original blueprints would have been a better replacement. Until then, we can but dream. Thank you so much for watching this video. Your viewership means a great deal. If you want to check me out on social media, then please visit my Blue Sky page at thechosenchimp.bsky.social. You can also come over and see me on Patreon. Patreon.com/chosenchimp is where you can become a distinguished follower for just £1 a month. And you can request your Doctor Who topic for coverage and your name will be mentioned in that video. In the meantime, I hope you are all doing well, and please join me next time for my final spooky video. I promise it is gonna be a belter. And until then, I wish you nothing but the best. For the love of Pete and his world, please do have a good one.